call this meeting to order. This is meeting 114 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry and Technology. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders, pursuant to the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, September 26, 2023, as well as the motion adopted on Monday, February 5, 2024. The committee is resuming consideration of its study on accessibility and affordability of wireless and broadband services in Canada. I'd like to welcome our witnesses today. We have from BCE Inc., Mirko Bibic, President and Chief Executive Officer, Rogers Communications Inc., Tony Staffieri, President and Chief Executive Officer, accompanied by Phil Hartling, President, Wireless, and finally from TELUS Communications Inc., Darren Entwistle, President and Chief Executive Officer. So welcome for coming today, this Monday morning. And with no further delay, I will give the floor to Mr. Bibic for 5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, members of the committee. I'd like to begin by taking a few minutes by recognizing that I'm joining you from unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation are recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters from which I'm speaking to you today. At Bell, our purpose is to advance how Canadians connect with each other and the world. To fulfill our purpose, we offer our customers access to the best networks at attractive prices, prices that are now significantly lower than in the United States. At the end of this year, Bell will have invested $23 billion since 2020 to expand our pure fibre and 5G networks. So that's $23 billion. While many other companies scaled back their investments during COVID-19, we, on the contrary, built more. Earlier this month, OpenSignal recognized us as a global leader in network speed experience. For the third year in a row, Global Wireless Solutions ranked Bell 5G Canada's fastest 5G network. And Bell's Pure Fibre Internet offers the world's best internet technology and is recognized as the fastest internet and Wi-Fi in the country. We have invested in building these networks to serve our customers not just in Montreal, Toronto, Quebec City, and Halifax, but also in places like Churchill, Happy Valley, Goose Bay, Lac Beauport, Trois-Pistoles, and Welland. Meanwhile, we remain relentlessly focused on improving the customer experience. According to the Commission for Complaints for Telecom Television Services, Bell outperformed all our competitors with a 6% reduction in the overall share of complaints. This is the 8th consecutive year that our share has decreased. We continue to improve our service and provide customers with greater flexibility through digital tools. Our award-winning MyBell app makes it easier for our customers to manage their services online. Our virtual repair tool fixes common issues from within the MyBell app. Importantly, our investments in fibre from Manitoba to Newfoundland have brought more competition to cable companies who have dominated the internet market for far too long. In Quebec, for example, we have deployed fibre to 2.7 million locations, bringing reliable fibre connectivity to customers who previously had little competitive choice.
Comes lower prices for Canadians. StatsCan's own data shows that Canadians pay much lower prices for wireless and internet today than they did just a short time ago. From 2019 to January 2024, wireless service prices declined over 47%, while internet prices dropped by almost 8%. In contrast, since 2019, Canadians have paid up to 18.5% more for all items, including gas, energy, and shelter. As prices have fallen, Bell has significantly increased how much data customers receive each month. For an average Canadian using between 5 and 7 gigs of wireless data per month, prices have fallen nearly 30%. That's $13 per month on our Virgin Plus brand since 2020. And instead of just 5 gigs of data back then, that user is now getting 10 times more, 50 gigs. In the last 5 years, wireless prices are down in Canada, more or less flat in the US, and up 24% in the UK. Today, Canadians pay less for wireless than in the US. Virgin's $34 for 50 gig plan is $7 less than a 10 gig plan on AT&T's Cricket brand. That's $7 less, but 5 times more data. On the internet side, Virgin Plus offers 300 megabits per second residential internet for $55. That same plan would cost $74 in the US. Les prix au Canada baissent et
Price declines in Canada are happening despite government-imposed spectrum costs among the highest in the world. Most recently, Canadian carriers paid the federal government $8.9 billion for 3.5 gigahertz spectrum. In Australia, carriers paid 1/10 of that amount. If government-imposed spectrum prices in Canada followed the global average, every Canadian's wireless bill would be $5 per month lower. World-leading networks, a focus on customer experience, and globally competitive prices. That is how we are delivering for Canadians.
Inflation a lot these days. Increasingly, Canadians are paying more, but feel like they're getting less. But with Bell, as the data shows, Canadians are paying less and they're getting more. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. We will now turn to Mr. Staffieri from Rogers.
Vous êtes en sourdine, monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, committee members. My name is Tony Staffieri, and I'm the President and CEO of Rogers. Thank you for the invitation today. With me is Phil Hartling, President. Lawrence.
Mr. Staffieri, I don't know if you're still, is Mr. Staffieri still connected? We've lost the video signal. Okay, we'll try to figure it out, and in the meantime, we'll move to our next witness. So, Mr. Entwistle from TELUS, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and honourable members. Bonjour tout le monde.
Good morning.
I will illustrate that wireless prices have decreased significantly as our telecom industry is delivering more value for Canadians. And we're doing so despite the escalating cost factors of production that our industry is experiencing. Additionally, I will emphasize the critical role our industry plays in Canada's economy and societies. First, according to StatsCan, the price of wireless services decreased 50.4% between 2018 and 2023. During that same period, average data consumption increased by 200%, according to the CRTC. Notably, during the 2023 holiday season, prices were 97% lower than 2020. Moreover, when compared to the G7 countries and Australia, Canada offers the best wireless value proposition with prices that are almost 5% lower than the average price that foreign carriers would charge for the same service. Second, as wireless prices are decreasing, the prices of other goods in Canada are increasing. Between 2018 and 2023, the cost of rent, transportation, energy, housing, and food increased between 22 and 27%. In that same period, our Canadian government confirmed that prices for wireless services declined faster than any other category of consumer goods and services. Third, as wireless prices decrease, the cost of building and operating wireless networks are rising markedly. Telecom equipment, mostly paid in US dollars, has risen over 24% from 2020 to 2023, and price increases from suppliers are accelerating. Canadian labor costs have increased 17%. Utilities and electricity have grown from 15%, whilst fuel prices have skyrocketed 54%. Furthermore, Canadian carriers are already paying the highest spectrum costs across the OECD. Over the last 10 years, carriers have paid $29 billion for spectrum licenses. Indeed, Canada's auction of 3,500 megahertz spectrum alone, so critical for 5G networks, extracted a record $9 billion from telecom operators. In contrast, in Japan and South Korea, they gave away the spectrum so that operators could concentrate their spend on deployment. In 2021 alone, these spectrum fees accounted for $100 on the annual wireless phone bill of every Canadian. Fourth, despite these cost factors in Canada being 103% higher than the G7 and Australia, we continue to invest in and operate the best quality networks in the world. TELUS has invested $259 billion in network infrastructure and operations over the past 24 years. This has contributed to Canada's wireless networks consistently ranking amongst the best globally, the best for speed, quality, user experience, and coverage, according to the OECD. The telecom sector has also rapidly advanced 5G coverage, reaching 90% of our population and continuing to grow. Next, TELUS provides low-income Canadians with highly subsidized access to vital high-speed connectivity. Through TELUS's Connecting for Good program, we offer extremely low-cost internet and wireless services to 1.1 million Canadian families and seniors that are underserved. Indeed, our industry should be a source of national pride, given it is powering Canada's digital economies and our digital societies. From 2009 to 2019, broadband connectivity enabled almost 20% of Canada's labor productivity growth. According to StatsCan and PricewaterhouseCoopers, our industry generated almost $77 billion in direct GDP for Canada in 2022 alone. Moreover, our industry supports 724,000 jobs with wages 42% higher than other service industries. At TELUS, our charitable and social support for Canadians is truly unmatched. Since 2000, we've contributed $1.7 billion in philanthropy to our communities and citizens in need. This includes volunteering 2.2 million days of service, more than any other company in the world. And through TELUS Health and TELUS Agriculture, we are leveraging broadband technologies to answer society's most pressing challenges in healthcare transformation and food security. Importantly, we're also supporting the prosperity and livelihoods of millions of Canadians who own TELUS shares. This includes seniors who rely on our dividends for their outcomes and as well for their incomes that they make that support their lives. And of course, it includes our TELUS team members who collectively represent our fourth largest shareholder overall. Clearly, the telecom industry is delivering enhanced value and lower prices for Canadians, and it is playing a vital role in strengthening our nation's economy. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Je retournerai.
Thank you. We're now going to go back to Mr. Staffieri for 5 minutes.
Morning, committee members. Thank you for the invitation today. With me is Phil Hartling, president of our wireless division. I've been following the work of this committee and pleased to provide facts and correct some inaccurate assumptions. Affordability is an issue in Canada, one that is real and felt by many Canadians. Other industries are using Canada's inflation trend to offer Canadians the same or less at higher prices. Rogers is doing the exact opposite. We're lowering our prices and offering Canadians more. Companies in other sectors simply can't say the same. I believe our discussion today needs to be based on facts. And here are some of them. Our wireless network reaches 99% of the population, but only covers 12% of our landmass. We're investing in satellite to mobile technology to connect every corner of our country. Our internet footprint reaches 60% of households today. We're investing to reach every household. In the last decade alone, Rogers has invested over $40 billion in our networks. To put this into context, that's more than the federal government's $39 billion in announced funding commitments for Canada's national housing strategy. Just last year, that included investing over $1 billion just to manage the huge increase in wireless data usage. Every year, we reinvest 90% of our profits back into Canada. That's investment in Canadian infrastructure, Canadian jobs, and the Canadian economy. We're making these record investments while inflation drives our cost of raw materials and labor up. On top of that, the federal government imposes more costs on wireless carriers than many other countries. We paid 7 times as much as US carriers for 3,500 megahertz spectrum. For low band 5G spectrum, we paid over 50% more. Annual spectrum fees in Canada are some of the highest in the world. They're up 15% in 3 years. Despite all of this, we're lowering prices for Canadians. The federal government's own data from Statistic Canada shows wireless prices are down nearly 50% over the last 5 years. In the last year alone, they're down 16%. Rogers has been the leader in driving this trend. We've cut the cost of data on our most popular 5G plan by over 70%. We led the industry and dropped our 5G entry price by over 40% to $50. We introduced a national Connected for Success wireless program with a free 5G smartphone and a $25 5G plan for over 2.5 million eligible low-income Canadians. We're offering 50 gigs for $34 on our Fido brand, all in the last year since coming together with Shaw. Customers are getting more for less, both in absolute terms and on a per gig basis. There are few industries today where you see record investments and consumers are receiving more, often at a lower cost. This is the outcome of rigorous competition. Last year, there were about 3,000 price plans in market. 4.9 million Canadians switched providers. What does this mean? It means that there's choice, more choice. The same can't be said about the UK or the US. The Wireless Consumer Price Index in the UK is up 24% over the past 5 years. In the US, it's up 1.5%. Wireless prices are higher in the US than in Canada. I'm looking forward to our discussion today, but I want to make sure that we're grounded in the facts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to MP Williams for 5 minutes, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we're here today because Canadians, although we're hearing some different stats today, they're telling us different stats. They're telling us that they're paying still some of the highest cell phone prices in the world. After 8 years under this Liberal government, we've had the cost of almost everything go up, and that's been already mentioned by our witnesses. When we look at grocery prices, we looked at just at the Toronto Daily Food Bank, there was 300,000 people visiting that food bank, bank fees, and cell phones. And cell phones are not a luxury anymore. Cell phones are essential. When we look at some of the facts, as cars are being stolen up 300% in Toronto alone, people use cell phones now to put Apple AirTags in their cars to track where their cars are going. They have doorbell cams where they're looking to make sure there isn't home invasions. People are using them to find coupons to go to the grocery store. Cell phones aren't a luxury, they're essential. And what happens when Canadians use more and more cell phones? They're using more data. When we look at the facts, Canadians need an average, by 2026, they're going to need about 50 gigabytes a month just to use the essentials on their cell phone. And we're not even talking about social media, and others. So when we look at other countries, and we do compare prices to other countries, we do, and we have found there's more competition in the U.S., there's more competition in Australia, and what happens is that prices have gone down. We heard from the other day, Mr. Staferi, from Mr. Hartling, that the prices in Rogers were lower than that of the U.S. and that of Australia. Do you stand by that statement at this point?
Thank you for the question, member of the committee. It's important we be clear on the facts. And the facts are twofold. One, prices are coming down in Canada by the government's own measure, Stats Canada. As I said in my opening comments, it's down 16% in the last year.
Sorry, only so many limit time here. I asked you a direct question. Are prices in Canada lower than the U.S. and Australia, as Mr. Hartling stated the other day? Yes or no?
When you look at our price plans here in Canada, they are lower. Undeniably, that's what the facts say relative to the U.S. I encourage you to look at information that Rogers submitted to this committee.
And Mr. Staferi, thank you so much. I'm going to compare some prices. We had Fido, and Fido is owned by Rogers. It's your lowest price plan. We look for Canadians struggling to survive. They're looking at the lowest price for the most amount of data. And we look at Fido, which is about $34 a month. We compare that to the Americans. They have Mint Mobile, and the Australians have a great one called Moose. They're both lower than that price, but more importantly, I think that Canadians need to know they both offer a 5G plan. When we talk about Canada, I know Rogers, TELUS, and Bell all talk about the fact that we have 5G almost everywhere across Canada. We're one of the most built-up networks, but Fido's only offered on 4G. So when we look at comparisons, I think if we had competition in Canada, Mint Mobile in the U.S., lower prices on 5G networks, we have Australia, several MVNOs on 5G networks at lower prices. Why is Fido, in your mind, do we have enough competition? And if we had competition, would Fido be in 5G?
This country has very robust and healthy competition. Consumers have choice. If you're to look at last year alone, 4.9 million Canadians switched their provider. If you're to look at Rogers itself, 20% of our customers switched plans. There is choice for Canadians, and there's very robust competition in the marketplace. As you look to our prices relative to the U.S., you use the example of Fido at $34. We have other plans on our Chatter brand that's as low as $19. And when you look at our price points relative to having the best networks in the world, certainly the value for money ranks at or near the top and definitely higher than the U.S.
Well, Mr. Staferi, I've just listed some competitors in the U.S. or Australia who all offer those price points at 5G. You're offering that at 4G. And we look at competitors across the U.S. or Australia, 3G is being even outdated. It's being taken off the networks in the U.S. because there's more competition. To go back to why we're here, you said you were going to increase your prices by $9. I'd like to go to both Bell and TELUS. Are you going to follow suit and increase your prices up to $9 for cell phone plans?
Who was that directed to?
To both of you, sir, Mr. Bibick and Mr. Entwistle.
Look, our focus, well, I'll start first, I guess. Our focus is on lowering prices for Canadians and delivering the very best services to as many Canadians as possible. I followed very closely your exchange with Mr. Staferi, and just to compare price, Virgin is a Bell brand, Virgin Plus. We offer it on the 5G brand, and our prices are undeniably lower than
Thank you, sir, and I appreciate that. I asked you a direct question, though. Are you going to be increasing your prices following Rogers and increase those prices by up to $9, yes or no?
Thank you very much for the question. Our focus is on lowering prices, and that's why our 50 gig plan, which is the one you referred to in your exchange with Mr. Staferi, is available at $34 on the Virgin Plus brand, which is on a 5G network, lower than in the U.S., UK, Australia, and France.
Thank you, thank you. That did not answer my question. Mr. Entwistle, could you answer that question, yes or no? Are you going to be increasing prices up to $9 a month?
You're on mute, Mr. Entwistle.
We've done over 400 price changes over the last 12 months. 90% of those price changes were price decreases. Only 10% were price increases. Number two, I'm not going to talk about price setting in a forum with my two competitors sitting right here. And to answer your question directly, I'm highly confident that the average price per gigabit is going to decline prospectively for the benefit of Canadians.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sorbara. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, gentlemen, to virtually to this panel and to our committee. The first thing I wanted just to say is obviously to each of the CEOs, many of the comments we've heard on the competitive dynamics within the Canadian wireless market or the Canadian telecommunications market here within the room have met with some skepticism, maybe a few chuckles. So I do want to get that on the record. And we can debate about the competitive dynamics and how they've evolved in the Canadian wireless market over the last 20 or 30 years. I remember sitting was a research analyst for many years, covered many of your companies and understand the dynamics well. But my first question will be to Rogers, the announcement of the price hike, whether it's $7 or $9 or $10 or whichever number you want to have. The timing, obviously, in an affordability pinch or an affordability crisis that many Canadians feeling, would you not admit that the timing was not great? And if I could use the two-word term, tone deaf to customers and to the Canadian populace, that it was not probably the right thing to announce at this time for whatever reason? To Mr. Staffieri. Mr. Staffieri, you're still on mute, sir.
Thank you. I was muted by the host. Hopefully you can hear me now. We made price plan amendments in January of this year. Those changes were to a small percentage of our customer base. The average was $5, and most of those customers was $4 or less. I should reiterate, it was a small percentage of our total base. But the other item to note that's of importance is these are customers who are on legacy plans that were out of contract. And so it was important to us to make sure that these customers had choice. And so the customers could go online with 2 clicks. They could get onto a plan that was in market and give them the best value for money for their circumstance, or they could call in and we could work with those customers. That was really the important part for us. Having said that, that's against a backdrop of price plans that are in market that continue to come down month over month and year over year. I mentioned earlier that on average, 3,000 price plans and promotions were in market last year. That's more than 250 per month. And we see quite a number, over 20%, in fact, of our customer base continually looking at trying to get the best value for money. Our competitive environment drives us to put plans and offers out there that are going to earn the business of Canadians.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Staffieri, for those comments. And going over to Mr. Babik, if I pronounce that, to Mirko, over at Bell. I could have done this for each of the entities. I just chose Bell this morning, and I pulled up your 20F and your annual information form and was looking at some of the numbers on the mobile division. And, you enjoy a 40% EBITDA margin, plus all of you folks enjoy a healthy margin on your EBITDA with regards to your wireless businesses. And yes, there's been some churn movement on Bell specifically. I haven't looked at Rogers and TELUS this morning, but I'm assuming that the same directional. And your ARPU measurement, as we would call it, average revenue per user, is continuing to increase. And I'm assuming that's about the data plans that people are using. They're moving up the value chain, which is a little more expensive. If you folks are so adamant that prices have come down, why is there so much skepticism in the marketplace that they have not? Is it you're not communicating properly? Is it that the statistical facts aren't correct? But why is there so much healthy skepticism out there? And I'll start with the presidency over BCE and then over to Mr. Entwistle of TELUS, please.
Thank you for that question. It's an excellent question because, I mean, it's conversations like this which are really important so that we can have a robust dialogue grounded on the facts, and we can communicate. In fact, we should use the opportunity here to communicate in a better way with Canadians. The facts are, and it's a serious discussion, right? Canadians really are concerned with affordability, and this study is also about accessibility. The study is about both affordability and accessibility. And our commitment, certainly over the last 5 years for Canadians, has been to invest massive amounts of money so that we can deliver better networks, better customer service, and undeniably lower prices. And as I shared in answer to the previous question, the prices have come down. I mean, they are lower than in the US, UK, Australia, France. I gave you the Virgin Plus example on 5G. But also, if you just compare in Canada, just 2019 to 2024 alone, we're offering, in some cases, 10 times more data for $40 less a month, and that's for a plan, a 6 gig. It's for a plan now. In 2019, we're offering 6 gigs for $90. Now on 5G, we're offering 60 gigs for $50. You can see the massive drop, and I could go. Yes. I could give you a wide variety of data buckets, 4G to 5G, and you'll see the prices come down. It's so
thank
clear.
You. And what I would say is, I'm pretty sure I'm out of time here, and Joel's looking at me. I would say to any of the CEOs, if there's any of that information that you're speaking to with regards to price comparisons that the committee can have, I would love to take a look at that data, as long as it's some sort of proprietary competitive stuff that we can't. But it would be great to have that information you're referencing.
Okay, appreciate that. We'll make sure to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
To answer the question, were you going to go to me next, or
yeah, you can
move on?
You can answer, Mr. Entwistle. I'll give you some time.
I think what you're seeing is a massive increase in data consumption. Canadians are amongst the highest data consumers in the world. Canadians consume almost twice as much data as German people, and more than twice as much as Italians. And that is reflective of the fact that wireless provides a tremendous amount of value in people's lives and allows them to manage their lifestyle logistics more efficiently and effectively, and that constitutes significant value for Canadians. I won't repeat the comment on low prices. I would just refer you to the studies done by Stats Canada, the Wall report done for ICED, or what we're seeing out of the OECD. The other element that I think is missing is the cost of devices. This is a part of our service offering where we do not control the economics. At the end of the day, those economics are determined by the device manufacturers, and they represent a significant component of the cost factor for Canadian consumers. And lastly, as it relates to profitability, the comment that the member was making, I would say that's one of our core responsibilities, amongst others, to our stakeholders, but it is key because we recycle those profits into the construction of the world-leading broadband networks that Canadians significantly benefit from. We also recycle those profits into paying down the debt that we've incurred to build those broadband networks, and debt for the industry is up 50%. Those profits return to Canadians in the form of taxes. TELUS has paid over $57 billion in taxes and spectrum remittances during my tenure with the organization. And of course, those profits help subsidize Connecting for Good programs. TELUS as an organization provides underserved Canadians with highly subsidized, low-cost programs that reach 1.1 million people within the country. So there's a symmetry to the profit that I think is important to understand.
Thank you, Mr. Entwistle. We're out of time. I'll just, before I turn it over to Mr. Garon for witnesses, if it's possible, I'd ask you to mute yourself when you're not speaking and unmute yourself when you're called upon, because otherwise we get sound interference and echo. So I'll now turn it over. Je vais passer la parole à Monsieur Garon pour 6 minutes.
Mr. Garon, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to begin by apologizing to our witnesses because I'm going to interrupt this just to be able to table a motion, because it's a motion that I tabled about Rio Tinto on the 4th of March. And I hope that we're going to be able to adopt it quite quickly. And this motion deals with what has been happening in Lac-Saint-Jean and Saguenay that could affect many, many jobs in Saguenay. So I'm going to read my motion that my colleagues have received. Given that the Minister of ICID in May 2018 and in June 2021 provided funding for $80 million to Rio Tinto and Alcoa to deploy technology in the industry for carbon neutral production of aluminum, given that the purpose of this motion was to make the industry greener and to maintain thousands of jobs, including in Quebec, in the area of Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, and whereas the marketing was supposed to be undertaken as of 2024, but the business recently announced that this technology would only be available in 2030 and there would be cost overruns. And pursuant to Section 182 of the Standing Orders, the committee invite, first of all, Mr. Jérôme Descresses, head of Rio Tinto, and the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, Mr. François-Philippe Champagne, 2 hours each, on the feasibility and the timeline for this new technology and any cost overruns that are anticipated and economic impacts. Chair, there are two things that I would like to add for the purposes of context. First of all, this has to do with the future of the industry in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. We know how important it is to decarbonize. We know how important this industry is in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. And we also know that these companies are putting off the use of this technology. And this is causing huge economic shocks in the area. Now, there are platform issues, there are tax issues, yes, but there is one thing that we can all agree on. It is important to decarbonize. It's important to adopt technology that's able to do this. And I think we should therefore quickly adopt this motion that is so important for Quebec.
Monsieur Garon, d'avoir présenté.
Thank you for having brought forward your motion. Mr. Turnbull, you have the floor.
Thank you to Mr. Garon for moving this motion. Certainly, I think it's an important issue to study. I wanted to clarify two quick things. One is that the intention of this motion is not to delay C27, but would follow any work that we have left on C27. That's one. The other, a very small change, which I would like to propose, is just to remove the word each in the last paragraph in the English version, which would suggest that we have 1 2-hour meeting on this. Right now, the way I read it, it looks like it's 2 hours each. Which makes it 4 hours as far as I interpret. So if I could just clarify if Mr. Garon would be amenable to those small changes and just the clarification that this is to come after the work on C27, I would certainly be supportive. I think we could probably say that he'd have the support of all the members on this side. Thanks.
I'll just so on that question that Mr. Turnbull, before I turn it over to you, Mr. Massey, I'll just check if there is consensus around the room or not. Otherwise, it's an amendment that's being proposed. Monsieur Gall.
Well, listen, what's important here is that we do not delay C27, but in the short run, that we be able to hear these people. So I'm willing to accept Rio Tinto and the minister for 1 hour each within this same meeting. However, what we could do at the time is assess the need for a second meeting. Obviously, we need to be able to respect the timeline for C27. And what I would like is that we do this as quickly as possible and that we give people time to prepare to come before the committee. So if I've understood you correctly, then there is a consensus. So it will be 1 2-hour meeting, 1 hour with each. Does everyone agree? So on the motion then, as amended, Mr. Massey.
Clarification to make sure, though, that usually the history of this committee has been to introduce motions that don't affect other parties' time during critical interventions like this. So I just want to ensure that I'm not going to lose any of my time at committee today related to this. Otherwise, it's something that is of great concern because the history of this committee has been one that doesn't actually impede members as being able to be involved. So I want to confirm with you that this block motion will not take away from the other time from other members in the committee.
You mean for other studies?
For witnesses today.
For witnesses, well, that depends on the committee. If we deal with this matter quickly, then we can resume questioning, but I can't guarantee that. It depends. But I'm hopeful, Mr. Massé, that you'll have your time as allocated.
Appreciate that because this is a serious issue and I want to support the member, but at the same time, not at the expense of me doing the right thing.
Agreed. So are there any other comments on the motion presented by Mr. Garon? Do we need, as amended, do we need a vote or do I have consensus? I see we have consensus, so the motion is amended and Mr. Garon, you still have about 4 minutes. Vous avez 4 minutes pour le reste de votre...
You have 4 minutes left. Thank you very much, Chair. And I'd like to assure my colleague that the purpose was not to take away from his time. I'm new on this committee, and I am taking note of all the committee's traditions here. Now, I'm going to begin with our witnesses from Bell. Under the Canadian system, cell companies own the infrastructure, like towers, for example, and therefore roaming fees are ideally low, but we need competition amongst these towers in order to have a minimum of competitiveness overall. So what I'd like to know from Bell is this. Why is it that roaming fees are so high? And I'd like a brief answer. Why are they so high? Well, I think that the regulatory framework, thanks to the regulatory framework and thanks to Bell, we have been able to develop competition. And that's why in Canada we have 4 national players that compete with each other, which means that prices have gone down substantially, as has been pointed out since 11 o'clock this morning. And in passing, I would add that in Australia, Finland, Germany, Ireland, South Korea, the United States, they do not have 4 national wireless players. So with your permission, I'd just like to say that we do have sometimes this bad habit of comparing ourselves with other countries. It's not a good habit, but I do appreciate why the major players do that. But let's take Videotron, for example. That's a public company. They've come before us, and they say they try and reduce roaming fees in order to be able to penetrate certain markets, for example, out west. So there are situations now where, and I think this is happening with Bell, where there is an appeal, for example, of arbitration. You said yourself that you have invested massively in infrastructure, and we acknowledge that. What that means is that you have world-class infrastructure. And so it seems to me that the capacity is underused. So it seems that everything is allowed, basically, to so that there aren't other competitors. Well, I'll just repeat that in South Korea, Australia, Germany, we have leaders, and they are leaders, and we are at the top of those leaders. Now, Bell did not appeal an arbitration decision when it came to roaming fees. The CRTC ruled on roaming fees between Bell and Quebecor, and we did not appeal. Thank you. So the big cell companies are an issue. My conservative the conservative member said that mentioned that prices have gone down. It's true that some prices have gone down. It happens in many countries. When technology is adopted, prices should go down. Now, when we receive the Competition Bureau here and the CRTC, we ask them if prices here had gone down more than, say, the countries that you have listed. Now, we aren't doing a very good job when it comes to those prices coming down when we look at our competitors. Now, I understand that competition isn't perfect and there's the regulatory framework. But what I'd like to know is this. Do you feel that over the next few years, there should be an effort to continue reducing these fees, and so that they're actually under the jurisdictions you compare yourself to? Well, as I said in my opening remarks, prices in Canada have gone down by 47.1% over the past 5 years. In the United States, I believe Mr. Staffieri mentioned this, prices have gone up by 1.5%, and in the UK by 24.4%. So prices are going down here, and significantly, and they're increasing elsewhere. This morning, there have been comparisons of the prices between Canada, the United States, and England, and our prices are lower. So in terms of percentage, our prices are going on. In terms of absolute prices today on the market, we have lower prices on the market than in many other countries. And what we want to do is invest even more in Canada in order to better serve Quebecers and Canadians. We want to do more. However, we need a foreseeable regulatory framework. We need to have policies that encourage investment, and federal policies that encourage investment. And unfortunately, the rulings or decisions that have been made can harm competition. Thank you very much.
Massé, la parole est à vous.
Mr. Massé, you have the floor.
Appreciate the witnesses being here. I wish they were in person, but we do have, to note that this was conducted after there was resistance of them even appearing before this committee. I think that says a lot with regards to Canadians. We didn't have the same problem from another witness that came here earlier. But I do want to focus a little bit, though, on something that Mr. Entwistle said that is important, is that successive Conservative and Liberal governments have taken over $25 billion in spectrum auction costs into the pockets and the revenue, which we haven't seen go back to consumers. We've actually had pricing issues that are significant. And Mr. Entwistle, you noted that $100 per year is what you're financing for this, I suspect. Would this be a fee that you would say across the board, or is this a fee for your particular company? And I'd like to know which of the two it is.
That fee is across the board. That fee reflects the fact that Canadian wireless operators have historically paid the highest prices for spectrum through successive spectrum auctions in the world. That is a significant part of our cost base, and I would argue it's inconsistent with the policy of trying to improve affordability.
Yeah, and that is important to note because we bake in a cost there that's no doubt burdened by Canadians paying for that. And we've seen, ministers from Maxime Bernier to our current minister benefit from these revenues and not have proper consumer protection in place. So I don't want that to be lost, but I do want to move to Mr. Staffieri. You were receiving $31.5 million in compensation. Is that an accurate figure? That's what I've been told and what is reported in the media. And that is significantly higher than your employees. So is there a breaking point? I've had the opportunity to work with Ted Rogers in the past. I don't believe he ever received $31.5 million per year. So what can you say to the employees that you represent when that price is quite significantly higher than the average person working at Rogers?
Compensation of our named executive officers, as with any public company, is transparently disclosed in our proxy circular. And so the number is public. And importantly, the manner in which the board determined compensation for the named executive officers is included in that document.
So would that cost then, we've heard, would you agree that $100 per person for the spectrum auction costs, would you agree with that argument in terms of Mr. Entwistle? Is that what Rogers passes on to its customer base per year?
Well, I'll reiterate the points made by Mr. Entwistle in that we pay amongst the highest spectrum fees in the world, which is going to be an increasing concern as we look to have more and more spectrum.
I just asked simply whether that was the case for you, and that apparently not. I guess the point I'm making too is, maybe could you put that in context in terms of how much of the cost of your salary is person's cost per year? And I don't know. I guess I would like to hear is like what warrants that, especially when that's basically 164 times more than the average telco worker is your salary.
I'm not sure I understand the question, but let me clarify. As I said, the board determines compensation for myself as well as named executive officers. And as we look to compensation for our employees generally, we always look to be competitive to attract and retain the best so that our employees can continue to do the best for our customers and for Canadians.
Well, I guess, you know, I want to move to another, I guess, Mr. Bibick then. With regards to the investments that you've made, you also recently cut nearly 5,000 Canadians from a job. So can you explain your record profits and your market share and also your commitment to your employees when you laid off 5,000 Canadians just recently and their families? You're obviously concerned about your shareholders, but when you have 5,000 people that received the hatchet most recently, during a time when you actually just talked about the fact that many of the costs are going up for Canadians right now, 5,000 people lost their jobs at Bell during a time of this struggle. So how do you justify that versus the individual families now that lost their jobs?
Yeah, thank you. Well, this was a very difficult beginning of the year at Bell, and we certainly did not make that decision lightly or take it lightly. And first and foremost, I want to thank the folks at Bell who were asked to leave, for their significant contributions over the years, and we made sure that each employee had a fair and reasonable severance package, and we supported them with career transition services. We're not the only ones, unfortunately, who had to take these very, very tough decisions. In fact, my competitors had to make similar decisions in the recent past, as have other companies like Québécois, TVA, Chorus, CBC, Radio-Canada, all direct competitors of ours. And if you look to the U.S., Meta, Google, Microsoft, again, all direct competitors of ours, made massive decisions in the same vein. And
if I could,
we didn't take it lightly.
I appreciate that, but also you reduced your investment in the London, Ontario region recently because of the CRTC decision. Would you care to explain that, why the CRTC decision decided to actually alter your business plan at the expense of consumers in the London region?
Yeah, so there were, back to combining the two questions that the member asked, hugely important issue. We are faced with, as I mentioned earlier, in response to a question from Monsieur Garon, we're faced right now with a very unsupportive public policy and regulatory environment, so that had an impact. We have a very difficult economy in Canada. Like, let's not hide the fact that this economy is struggling. Productivity is amongst the lowest in the world.
Are you losing money as a corporation right now, or are you actually having profit margin increases or profits stabilized?
So
you're losing money?
Answer the question. So inflation is up, interest rates are up, and competition is increasing, which is an undeniably good thing for consumers, which we support. So if you put the three things together, technological change, lowering prices, difficult macroeconomic environment, and a wholly unsupportive public policy environment, companies have to transform and make adjustments, and this is what we've been doing.
Thank you. Mr. Perkins, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too would like to express my disappointment that you're not here in person. I'm sure you could have got on your private jets to get here without too much trouble. And I'm glad, Mr. Staffieri, that you got your Wi-Fi fixed so that you could be in here. I'd like to start off, Mr. Staffieri, to ask a question. During your acquisition of Shaw, one of the whistleblowers from your transition team told me, and I think it was also in the media, that you were laying off 5,000 people and bringing these two companies together. How many people have you laid off?
In our coming together with Shaw, we've been very transparent from the outset that there would be duplication of roles. And as we work through the integration, we've been very thoughtful about the way we handle those duplication of roles. And so we launched a voluntary departure program so that our employees had the choice to choose.
Looking for a number. Can you please I'm on limited time. I'm sorry. Can you just give me a number?
As we work through those duplication of roles, we work through them. It isn't a number we've disclosed externally. But what I will say is
since you had a number of conditions, you had a number of conditions that the minister put on this acquisition, which included creating jobs, yet your own transition team said that you were cutting 5,000 jobs. Please answer the question.
Rogers is a net growth company. We made commitments in writing with respect to the Shaw merger, and we are on track to those commitments that we've made.
Okay, so you won't answer the question.
Annual disclosure.
You won't answer the question. I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on then. You also brag in your analysts' reports, your investor relations reports, your quarterly reports to shareholders. You brag about your average revenue per user going up every year. That's why Canadians feel they're paying more, because you're charging them more. So can you comment about why, to your investors, you brag about the average cost per user going up, while here you say and make claims about your Black Friday sale being what we should judge you by on your cell phone rates?
It's important to clarify at the outset that average revenue per user does not equal price. ARPU, or average revenue per user, is an accounting metric which is total revenue divided by number of customers, and it includes services that the customer can choose to add on, like device protection.
And yours has gone up from $50.75 in 2020 to almost $60 now in only 4 years. So I will ask you again, isn't that why Canadians feel their prices are going up and they're paying more, not less?
As I said, the calculation of ARPU includes additional services, but it also includes enterprise revenues, like Tesla is one of our customers. And so the revenues from there are included in total revenues. And so you have those business accounts, which have been growing for us, that have been supporting some of the increase that you see in ARPU.
Mr. Entwistle, I have a question for you. The carbon tax is going up 23% on April 1st. You run, as Rogers and Bell do, quite large retail networks, quite large fleets to manage manage all of your businesses. You also offer or have to maintain diesel fuel for your cell phone towers being brought up. Is the 23% increase in the carbon tax going to result in increased costs for cell phone rates and wire line users? You're on mute, I think.
I've taken it off. I don't envisage that particular cost flowing through to cell phone users. Secondly, TELUS is an organization that leverages our technology to bridge time and distance and reduce the carbon footprint. And our goal is to be not just carbon neutral, but nature accretive by 2027.
So you're going to be altruistic and eat those costs. You don't actually pass on and increase taxes to your customers.
I think as an industry, we've shown ourselves to be significantly proficient at eating costs. Again, if you go back to my remarks, compared to the G7 plus Australia,
you can see that, Mr. Entwistle, with the 60% operating gross margin, you're very generous on your eating of costs. A quick question for Mr. Staffaneri, please.
Mr. Staffaneri, our operating margin.
Mr. Staffaneri, if I could. Mr. Staffaneri, you claim that you're lower prices than the United States. So I have here, I think your all-in North American plan standard, not Black Friday sale, is $125 for a single line to be data, text, unlimited for North America. I have here a friend's bill who gets 5 lines in the United States, everything around the world included for those 5 lines, and it costs $280. And now that's a family plan. So on an individual plan, I have a friend who went across to Rochester, not far from Ottawa, and get paid $60 for the same global plan. You're charging twice as much as I can get from AT&T, not a little small company, AT&T in the United States as a regular plan. How can you claim that your rates are lower when AT&T is charging half of what you are?
Committee member, I think it's important that we stick to the facts and we compare apples to apples, not apples to oranges. In your example, you took a single line and compared it to An AT&T
Family
customer
line. I
with
did a
5
family line
lines.
of 5 as well.
Mr.
What you'll
Perkins.
find, and the data is very clear, ISED's own study showed that Canadian prices in virtually every bucket was 25% lower in Canada than in the U.S. Again, refer you to the information that Rogers submitted to this committee, showing very clear comparisons of Canadian to U.S. pricing.
Merci. Je passerai la parole à Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
And thanks to the witnesses for being here today. What spurred this study on was that Rogers announced a $7 to $9 increase for customers that were off contract, rolling into off contract, or rolling off contract. And the Conservatives jumped on this as an opportunity to claim that cell phone prices were increasing when we know from Stats Canada and with your testimony today has been corroborated that cell phone prices on average are actually decreasing. What is useful to me in this conversation is to be informed by facts and evidence. I want to ask each one of the witnesses if they would table for the committee information that backs up the claims that you've made today, which is that your basic plans are decreasing in price. Mr. Staffieri, would you table documents with this committee that demonstrate a year-over-year downward trend in the prices for your plans from 10 gigabytes to 60 gigabytes over the last 5 to 7 years? Would you table that information to this committee after the fact?
Committee Member Rogers would be pleased to provide the factual data on our price plan changes.
Mr. Babik, would
demonstrate price declines.
Thank you. Mr. Babik, would you be willing to do the same on behalf of Bell?
Yes, it's Bibic, but yes, absolutely. Thank you.
And Mr. Entwistle, would you be willing to do the same on behalf of TELUS?
Yes, we would be pleased to do so, both our information and also third-party independent assessments.
Thanks. And if possible, it would be great to have an average price per gigabyte year over year, which I think is probably a useful measure to show that downward trend as well. Can you also table data on the rate at which users are consuming data today? I understand from some of your testimony that the consumption rate of data is increasing quite dramatically as well. I think someone said up to 200%, which may explain some of the misperceptions that are out there when we factor in prices of basic packages versus what bills people pay. Would each one of you be willing to table any data that you have on the increased rate of data consumption? Mr. Entwistle?
Yes, we'll table, again, our information plus independent third-party information as it relates to data consumption and do it on a relative basis to show Canada versus other G7 countries.
Thank you. Mr. Babik, would you do the same?
Yes.
Mr. Staffieri?
Yes, Rogers will do the same.
Thanks. You also have said that you have made significant increases in investments in infrastructure, which I understand is, a large. Those are very large amounts of money and commitments. Would each one of you do the same year over year for the last 5 years on your infrastructure spends or investments? I'll just accept a shaking of the head if you're willing to do that. I think you probably will be. Great. I think that will help inform our committee report here with some facts and evidence. Mr. Staffieri, I wanted to ask you about the Rogers-Shaw merger. We've heard Conservatives claim over and over and over again that merger has increased prices. My understanding is that since that merger has happened, that prices have fallen, that Rogers packages are less expensive. Is that true, Mr. Staffieri?
It is very much true that since we concluded the Shaw merger, prices have come down in both wireless as well as wireline services across the country, but in particular in the West.
How much have prices fallen since the merger, Mr. Staffieri?
If you're to look at wireless pricing, I'll refer back to StatsCan since it's an official, credible data point. It's come down 16% in the last year alone for the industry. And if you're to look at some of the price plan changes that we made, they've been significant. I mentioned us lowering our 5G wireless entry point down to $50. That's a 40% reduction in terms of an entry to a 5G plan. And our most popular 75 gig plan is down 70% year over year. If we look at home internet services, those have come down significantly as well, again, against the backdrop of inflation in other sectors that Canadians are experiencing.
Thank you. And I understand that we've heard testimony time and time again, and I've experienced this in talking to residents in my riding of Whitby, that the average customer does not perceive that their bills and prices, mainly their bills, are coming down as quickly as the data shows. So there's a prevalent misperception out there. We know that the data is telling us from StatsCan that prices are coming down, that the consumer price index shows a lot of prices for almost all goods that Canadians pay for are going up at the same time where wireless prices are coming down. You've said that today. So what explains the prevalent misperception out there? Mr. Entwistle, I'm going to go to you to see if you can explain this. Why are Canadians not recognizing the dramatic price decreases that seem to be the case, that seem to be fact?
I'd say number one, I don't think the industry has done a very good job communicating with the general public in terms of the value that we provide and the cost of the service. Secondly, if you mathematically cut the cost in half, but the user uses twice as much data as what they did historically, the cost is going to look the same to the user from a nominal bill point of view. Thirdly, as it relates to the device component, that's an area where we do not control the economics. We are price takers, not price makers on that front. And that's a significant component of the overall cost, sometimes making up close to 50% of the overall bill. I think those three factors have had an impact on Canadian psychology. The other thing that has not been made clear is the value that we bring through that increased data is significant. I talked about in my remarks, our move on technology and our deployment of infrastructure and services has created $77 billion in GDP for Canada alone in just the 2022 year. I think connecting the dots in terms of the value that that creates for our economy and our society with consumer understanding is something that the industry has not been particularly adept at and something that we need to move forward on. And then lastly, we do great things on the affordability front for underserved Canadians at scale, by the way. There's 1.1 million Canadians, from kids that are aging out of foster care, Indigenous women, low-income families and low-income seniors, as well as new immigrants supported by the Canadian government that have services from TELUS that are highly subsidized below our cost base to support the affordability agenda. I think we need to do a better job communicating those things, and that's on us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Monsieur Garon, la parole est à vous.
Mr. Garon, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to continue with you, Mr. Staffieri. I think it's very interesting that you told our Conservative members, you talked to them about comparing apples and apples. They seem to be very interested in apples and apples. Now, I'd like to come back to roaming fees. Earlier on, I made a mistake when I said Bell. That was a mistake made in good faith. Now, you appealed an arbitration ruling regarding roaming fees with Videotron. I understand that was a business decision. Now we're talking about jurisdictions, and I understand that you don't necessarily want to go into all those details here before this committee. However, do you understand that from an outside perspective, that of a parliamentarian, for example, or a consumer, that this may be seen as being you wanting to reduce competition and to actually push competitors off the market, out of the market?
Committee member, respectfully, when it comes to roaming amongst competitors' networks, there's a process in Canada through the CRTC, and we've been going through that process. I think it's important to note that roaming fees have been coming down, but as we made public in our filing when we appealed that decision, having roaming rates that are less than the actual
Je comprends. Je vais vous interrompre, M. Staffieri, parce que
Mr. Steffi, I'm going to interrupt you because I don't have much time, so I don't want you to see me as being rude, but I'm just asking for a factual response. Is it normal for a company of your size to appeal a decision like that one? Does it happen often?
It's important that we preserve the economics of the investment we make. And when there are roaming rates that are decided that are below cost, that goes against a fundamental policy of this
Monsieur Staffieri, en tout respect, Monsieur Staffieri.
Mr. Staffieri, respectfully, I have 30 seconds left, so I'm asking you a question. Usually arbitration decisions aren't appealed. That's happens under very extraordinary circumstances. So your answer should be a yes or no. Does it often happen that a company of your size appeals an arbitration decision? That's a yes or no answer. Does it happen frequently?
We appealed the decision in this case because the result was just did not make economic sense for Rogers and for the industry long term. A competitor is more than welcome to invest in their own network in the event that they're not happy with a decision on roaming.
Merci. Monsieur Massé, la parole est...
Thank you, Mr. Massé. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, let's talk about economic sense here, Mr. Staffieri. $12 per day, that's what you charge people to have access to their phone when they go into the United States. If you turn it on and it's not in airplane mode, you get that charge right away. Then later on, if you find out, you can actually then get a monthly plan per year at $25 per year. So how do you justify charging people $12 a day when they go in the United States, especially we have so many families that have to cross over for health and medical reasons, and just to turn on their phone to be accessed without even a chance to say yes or no, you charge $12. Why is it $12 a day just to have your phone on to get a text in the United States?
Well, we have plans depending on how the customer intends to use it. And if it's an infrequent user, then we look at coming up with a price point that takes into account
my partner, I'm telling you right now, my wife, my partner has had this happen where she turned on her phone and charged $12 no matter what right away. How do you explain $12 just to turn on your phone? This is what happens every day. We have doctors, nurses, and others that commute into Detroit, thousands of people every single day. How do you justify $12 just to turn on your phone? And then meanwhile, if you want to pay $25 per month, you have that. But imagine that paying $12 times 30, which, by the way, that's never advertised. You have to go in the store and find that out, versus the $12.
Our pricing plans are clearly promoted and advertised on our websites, and our in-store reps are very transparent about the options with respect to roaming outside of Canada.
Your in-store reps are, but after you've actually been taken to the Woodhouse, so to speak, after years, and then also too is if you just turn on your phone, you're charged $12 just to actually get an emergency call. How do you justify that? I'd like to know, how do you justify $12 just to turn on your phone for emergency access if you go in the United States?
The pricing of our roaming plans, both in the U.S. and internationally, are based on a number of factors, including the cost of that, which is beyond our control as we buy roaming minutes and data buckets from the operators in the various countries.
Yeah, but you don't go back and rebate people for having a phone on for emergency and never using it. Just take the $12 and you run with it. That's the problem here. It's about fairness.
Thank you, Mr. Massé. Monsieur Généreux, la parole est à vous.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Mr. Généreux, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. Mr. Bibic, if I understood you correctly, TELUS has invested 23 billion years over the past 4 years, 40 billion for Rogers. TELUS, we didn't get an exact number, but it's about a $75 billion investment in all, if I understood correctly as well. You changed your decision to withdraw from, or rather you made the decision to withdraw from some investments you'll be making because the government or the CRTC or various bodies were not creating an environment that was favorable for investment. Could you just explain exactly what you mean when you say an environment that fosters investment? Thank you very much for the question. That is a very, very important question. I mentioned from the outset that we have invested in Quebec $5 billion per year. That's what we invest in the economy of Quebec every year. And we have provided fiber optic in Lac-Beauport, Trois-Pistoles, Saguenay, Lac-Saint-Jean, Thérèse de Blainville. The list goes on, and we want to do more. But recently, the CRTC has imposed a decision that forces us to act in Quebec and elsewhere and to work with the dominant players who have most of the market. And what we are trying to do is build fiber, optic fiber, in order to be able to increase competition in Quebec and elsewhere. But the CRTC is saying you're investing tens of millions of dollars in each community. But once that network is there, then a competitor can use your network in order to compete with you, even before we have any subscribers. So what that means is that it reduces the profitability of our investments. So we've had to reduce our investments. Mr. Bibic, the CRTC's decision, you're talking about Videotron without naming it, but Mr. Palado had some very severe comments to make with respect to his competitors, including yourself, because to be able to increase competition, you need this. Are you afraid of competition? You say that your investments do not allow you to make any profits when this happens, or profit. But however, the consumer is the one who's going to have to pay the bill that everyone else is paying. So why is it that you can't continue to do this because of the CRTC's decision? Well, listen, we want there to be competition in Quebec. We've had fiber optic. We've deployed that. We're reducing prices. Bell is the one who's been reducing these internet services prices from Manitoba to Newfoundland. And in Quebec, we have done that. However, and there is competition, and so other competitors have to also improve their networks. And we want to do more. However, when there are communities that are a little more remote, it becomes very, very costly to build these networks. And the CRTC is imposing its decision, like the one I just described. And when that happens, the profitability of those investments in more remote areas and the costs of building become very, very high. And what that means is that we cannot invest as much as we have in the past. Mr. Bibic, do you receive subsidies from the government? I'm asking the question of Mr. Bibic, but I would like the other two witnesses to answer as well, because they are also the CEOs of important companies. Have you received grants over the past 4 years or any subsidies from the government? We work in partnership with governments at all levels in order to share construction costs in remote areas. And when we've received those subsidies, we deliver the goods. So what then is the percentage that you receive from the government? Well, I don't have the numbers in front of me. Well, if possible, then I'd like you to send those numbers to the clerk, please. Mr. Staffieri, I have the same question of you, and same to Mr. Entwistle. Well, what I would say to the members, to the chair, is regarding funds received under programs are accessible in public accounts. Thank you. However, I'd like to hear from the companies themselves. What amounts did they receive over the past 4 years in order to be able to make these investments? Because the Canadian public wants and is demanding to know how prices can come down, because their prices are supposed to be coming down for their wireless services. And it's not always visible on their bills. So, Mr. Staffieri and the other witnesses.
Received, in particular over the last few years, subsidies and grants from the government to build out rural and Indigenous communities. That's been more about accessibility than affordability. We have not received any material grants or subsidies that are focused on affordability for Canadians. We've done that as an industry through efficiency and productivity gains. In terms of the amounts, it'll depend on a region by region basis as we build out these communities across the nation. But in some areas, and in particular, look at some of the coverage work we've done in BC on Highway 16, Highway 14, much of that is without government assistance. And so as an industry, and certainly at Rogers, we are a net payer of taxes and fees to the government while we continue to bring down prices and improve accessibility and coverage and reach.
How about TELUS?
So TELUS has done significant deployments in terms of broadband wireless and wireline within our rural communities.
Did you get subsidies? That's my question.
Yeah, I'm getting to that. In terms of 507 rural communities that we have connected and 577 Indigenous communities that we've connected, almost 500,000 rural households. The preponderance of that we've done of our own volition on our own cost base, but we have collaborated as well with the Canadian government in the Connecting Canadians program, where we've had federal support to extend our broadband network to some of those communities. I would be pleased to file those amounts with you. They are modest in nature in terms of relativity to the overall spend program.
Thank you. MP Gahir, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for appearing before the committee. We know that wireless prices are going down. The data shows it. It's practically undeniable. So I'd like to actually thank the witnesses. I believe in giving credit where credit is due, and also credit to the current industry minister and the previous industry minister for their work on this file. My question is in particular for Mr. Bibic for Bell Media. Earlier this year we heard that Bell Media was cutting 4,800 jobs, and the company was selling 45 of its radio stations. This is on top of the cuts from last year in June, where 1,300 jobs were cut, and I think it was 9 different radio stations. And Bell Media went on record to say that it's blaming regulators and policymakers for these cuts. So I felt like that was a bit of scapegoating going on. I think my question is, in this age of misinformation, disinformation, where we see a democratic backsliding across the world, where democracies are being targeted by misinformation, wouldn't you agree, Mr. Bibic, that media companies have a role to play to, you're still making billions of dollars. These companies are very profitable. Wouldn't you agree that companies have a bit of a role to play to make sure that our news infrastructure stays intact so that we can fight against that misinformation and disinformation?
Yes, thank you. It's a great point and a fundamentally important issue to have credible news in an age of disinformation. Now, I'd like to clarify some of the facts, though, as it relates to Bell Media. So fully less than 10% of the most recent announced job cuts were in the media division. The large majority of those unfortunate job reductions were not in media. And the same thing, the reductions from 2023, there was a mention made of 1,300 and, a small... they're all unfortunate, but they were not all at Bell Media. In fact, the minority of those job reductions were at Bell Media. The fact of the matter is, when it comes to the media business generally and news as well, what worked 3 years ago, 5 years ago, or 10 years ago in Canada no longer works. So we have to adjust. Our advertising revenues declined by $140 million in 2023 compared to 2022. That's a massive reduction in revenues. Our CTV network across the country incurred $185 million in operating losses last year, despite the fact that CTV is the most watched news network. And I've shared the next stat publicly many times. We incur more than $40 million in losses in news per year. Despite that, we continue to invest in news, and we continue to invest in our media division. We deliver more news than we are required to by regulation, and we've just shifted how we do news. We're now on all the time. We're making sure that we disseminate news from our skilled journalists every point in time during the day over our digital news platforms, and then at particular points in time on our conventional broadcast network, we then air the news as well. So we're completely invested in continuing to deliver world-class news and to be number one, but we just had to adjust how we operate, given that we operate in an environment. Right now, our competitors are no longer the traditional competitors that you think of, right? Typically, you'd think global you'd think CBC, Radio-Canada. We're now competing in the news realm against Meta, Google, Facebook, which is Meta, Snap, et cetera, et cetera. And when I made reference to the regulatory environment back when we announced the reductions, it was to make the point that in Canada, the traditional broadcasters are saddled with significant regulatory requirements. BC contributes close to $2 billion a year in regulatory fees. And, the Metas, the Googles, the Disney Pluses, the Paramounts, the Netflixes, they operate in Canada. They generate billions of dollars in revenue from Canadian viewers and consumers, and they do not contribute any of that. So we just need to face this. And last point, just the level. It's just a question of leveling the playing field. That's all.
Okay. So I think on that point, we know that this government brought in the Online Streaming Act that's abolishing certain licensing fees that'll save the company about $40 million a year. There's a $100 million deal that was struck with Google. 30 million of that is expected to go to broadcasters. So there is work being done on this front. But I guess my larger point is, if it's just a profit statement that we're looking at, what kind of world are we heading into? Does that mean that all local newspapers, local radio stations are going to close? Does that eventually mean that larger news carriers are going to close as well? How will people get that information? Is it just going to be off of TikTok and Instagram stories?
Look, we have to confront the reality that if the vast majority of so in media, revenues are generated through subscriptions or advertising. And we have to confront the fact that if the lion's share of advertising revenues, we accept the fact that the lion's share of advertising revenues will go to the Googles and the Metas, et cetera, and they not required to contribute anywhere near as much as the Canadian broadcasters are having to contribute, whether or not those are digital, print, television. There's going to have to be adjustments. So what we say is we're open to competition. I think Canadians should have a wide choice of news, a wide choice of entertainment content, a wide choice of sports content. All we've ever asked for really is to have a level playing field. Just let everyone compete on the same terms, and we'll be happy to continue to make massive investments in entertainment content, sports content, and news content.
Thank you. I just want to make one last point. It's not really a question. It's just I meet folks all the time that tell me that they know what's going on sort of in Canada from my Instagram stories or my social media posts, and that fundamentally worries me. So I think it's food for thought for you folks to think about how news can actually reach individuals and younger generations. Thank you.
I think that's so critical, and that's why we're making more and more investments pivoting towards delivering our news every single point in time during the day on our digital platforms. That's exactly why we're making those investments towards digital.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Je passerai la parole.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Entwistle, I was fascinated by something in your presentation you mentioned a couple times about the impact of spectrum, $5 a month, I think you said, on average per cell phone bill. And I think when Mr. Pelado was here, he also talked about a similar number around roaming. So I'd like your opinion. What do you think it is for roaming, the CRTC mandated fees, which haven't been, I believe, reduced in 5 years? What's the impact on a monthly phone bill by the fact that government policy hasn't changed?
I would have to get back to you with the specifics on that breakout in terms of its componentry on the bill.
If you could, that would be great, if you could do it in writing. Secondly, you talked about the issue of the financing of phones, right? Phones have gotten very expensive. They used to be a few $100, $500. Now some of them are more than $2,000 or more. I believe the government policy is you can't finance that in a plan over 24 months directly in the plan. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so do other jurisdictions limit it to 24 months? Does that not provide more relief for consumers? Since most people, I assume, aren't changing their phone every 2 years, they're keeping them a little longer now.
As the phones have gone from, as you say, a few $100 to up to $2,000, extending the financing period beyond 24 months would indeed be extremely helpful as it relates to affordability. And that type of thing is normal in other jurisdictions, to answer your question directly.
Okay, Mr. Bibick, I'll ask just on the same question, roaming and and the locked-in 24-month limit on cell phone financing, which I believe you guys don't make any money off of. You don't finance. You don't make profit on the phones. Is that true?
So I echo Mr. Entwistle's answer on the handsets and amortizing those over more than 2 years and the impact that would have, positive impact that would have for the consumer. Yes.
And as a period of time.
And we eat the cost of the financing.
What would because you're essentially financing the phone for consumers, but what would be a preferable time limit if there had to be one?
I see no downside whatsoever to extending the financing term to 36 months. We had it previously, and I think that would be decidedly in the interests of consumers, particularly given how expensive smartphone devices have become.
Thank you. Mr. Staffieri, can I ask you, what date did Rogers start negotiating the job and offer a job to former Liberal Minister Navdeep Bains?
Committee member, I don't have the, can't recall the specific date on that, but I'd be happy to provide it.
I would very much appreciate that, because just to let you know, the announcement of his job was the day after his ministerial cooling off period. So I assume the announcement day and the beginning of negotiations on his salary didn't happen on the same day.
As I said, committee member, I'll provide the relevant dates to you and the committee.
Yeah, I'll turn the rest of my time over to MP Williams.
Mr. Staffieri, the Rogers-Shaw merger came with some government conditions underpinning its takeover of Shaw Communications. Of all the four conditions, four of the first four, which were creating jobs, so 3,000 jobs in Western Canada in the first 5 years, spending $2.5 billion enhancing, expanding 5G coverage, and spending $1 billion to connect rural, remote, and Indigenous communities. How far are you in completing those conditions?
Committee member, with respect to the commitments that we made, we are tracking ahead on those, both in terms of the investments that we committed to, but also in terms of employment. You would have seen immediately on the closing of the Shaw merger, we repatriated jobs back to Canada, most of those jobs going to Western Canada. And as we continue to grow our investments in infrastructure, the job numbers continue to climb.
So just if you have those, do you have the exact number of jobs created so far in Western Canada?
We'll provide those as part of our regular reporting, and if the committee wants those in advance, we'd be happy to provide those also.
Thank you. And do you have any layoffs that you know of so far? Have there been any layoffs in Western Canada?
As I said earlier, and we've been very transparent, to the extent there have been duplicate roles in the coming together with Shaw, then those roles have been eliminated. But net, we continue to be a growth company, and we're always looking for opportunities for individuals that were impacted to move to other areas of the company, or give them the choice to voluntarily decide to leave the company.
So just to clarify that there have been layoffs, is that correct?
There have been the removal of duplicate roles.
Okay, thank you. Just to circle back to a comment, so when we had Videotron in front of this committee, he did talk about how it seemed when the deal was first made, and what was interesting when we went through testimony, you did get to pick Videotron. You picked Videotron to be the buyer of Freedom Mobile. They are talking about that they have found that they're fighting tooth and nail the CRTC to actually start competing with you. Do you foresee that you're going to start working alongside Videotron as you stated you would once this deal went through?
Throughout the process, we were required to sell Freedom Mobile, and we went through an open and, quite frankly, transparent process in looking for a buyer that the government would approve, and we went through that process. We agreed to a number of conditions with the government as well as with Quebecor Videotron, and we continue to abide by those conditions. There is nothing that Rogers has done or intends to do that would prevent Quebecor from investing in networks and competing in an open market.
Merci beaucoup. Je passerai maintenant la parole.
Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to Tony Van Bynen.
What I find most frustrating is when we talk to these different telecom companies and everybody is developing their own networks, it's similar to, say, Ford or GM or Tesla building only roads for Ford or only roads for Tesla or only roads for GM. And so the infrastructure seems to be a big part of the discussion. And when the CRTC announced that large telecommunications service providers would have to provide competitors with access to their fiber-to-home networks, Bell announced that it would reduce its planned network investment by $1 billion. And I understand, and I've heard the argument that there needs to be a return on equity. Are we getting to the stage now where the fiber optic or the telecom networks need to be considered as utilities and need to become return on investment utilities that are regulated? I'd like to hear from each one of you.
Who should go first?
You started. Go ahead.
Okay, so I think, well, back to the analogy which prefaced the question. I think the more apt analogy for of the CRTC decision would be requiring one of those, seeing one of those auto manufacturers that was mentioned build a plant costing billions of dollars, and the regulator saying you have to give access to that plant to a competing auto manufacturer so that they could build their own automobiles using your technology and your facility. And so this is exactly what's happened with the CRTC. In fact, in telecom, what you want, the reason Canada's been so successful in being able to provide more accessibility, in other words, wide coverage across this vast land of high-quality, world-leading networks at lower prices, is because each of the players who are here today, including others who have appeared, have to build their own networks. Like one of the fundamental basis of competition in Canada is the competition on networks, and then the services we can offer over those networks, and the innovation that comes with those networks, and then the lower prices
let me
that
give
comes
you
as a
an
result.
example.
That's what we should be supporting in Canada.
But let me give you
it's fundamentally important.
I'm sorry, I just have a few moments. But let me give you an example. When I was the mayor of the town of Newmarket, I was the founding chair of YorkNet, and YorkNet put a fiber optic backbone to all, or is in the process of doing that, to all of the homes in the York region. As a result of that, organizations like Vianet and organizations like Telemax have come in with very competitive pricing products. So how can you say that we shouldn't be looking at the telecom system as a utility?
I mean, take it one step further. If you don't have to take it very many steps further and have a rule which says, if you treat it as a utility and everyone can ride on the same network or use the same network to compete, you lose all the benefits of resiliency and redundancy, which is so important in this day and age. Imagine having only one network connecting a community and that network goes down or that network's attacked. You want redundancy. You want the competing networks. That's what makes speed. That's what improves speed. That's what lowers prices. That's what connects more and more communities across the country. It's so important.
But you can build redundancy into different networks. I've heard an awful lot around how we were criticized for the cost of spectrum prices. And in a research document, Dr. Gregory Taylor, an associate professor of the University of Calgary, put TELUS's assertion in perspective, pointing out that the government only sets the initial bid for a licensing auction. So, and I'll start again with TELUS. What approach does TELUS suggest for ensuring that the final price of the spectrum licenses are lower in Canada? So I'd like to hear that from TELUS, please. Mr. Entwistle.
Okay. So I would argue that the auction framework in Canada was flawed. And as a result of that flawed auction framework, it extracted significant economic rents in terms of spectrum prices paid. That's been to the detriment of the industry in totality. I would argue that if we followed the auction process that the FCC has implemented in the US or even within Europe, that would have generated better outcomes for both operators and Canadians with lower prices paid on the spectrum front. The impact of increased costs on spectrum, I think, is inconsistent with an affordability agenda. When you couple that with the fact that the demographics and topography of Canada are particularly challenging, and we have the highest cost factors of production, and I gave you the stat that the costs here are 103% greater than the G7 plus Australia, I think we have to take a keen eye in terms of what's taking place on the spectrum cost front. I can also answer the fiber question if you want as well.
Yes, go ahead, please.
So I think to the extent to which a market is competitive and customers are being well served from both affordability but also quality and innovation, clearly there's not the need for an interventionist regulatory activity, and the posture should be more benign. If the market is deemed to be insufficiently competitive, then I think there's the opportunity for the government to step in. But if the government does step in and put an obligation on an incumbent player that's not yet delivered a return on the original fiber investment, and that fiber investment has been significant with the risks inherent in that, the wholesale prices that should be set should be fair so that the individual, the company building that broadband infrastructure can exact a fair return at both the retail and at the wholesale level.
Okay.
Thank you, MP Van Bynen. You're out of time.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'll turn it over à Monsieur Garon pour 2 minutes 30.
Mr. Garon, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Entwistle, many of your employees are concerned about how many closures there have been here and how many jobs have been outsourced to other countries. Now, in reports to stakeholders in 2014 and 2023s, it says that there were dismissals of over 1,800 jobs, and over the same period, your values increased by hundreds and hundreds of percentage points. So what I'd like to know is why are jobs being sent elsewhere and outside Quebec in the country rather than keeping them here? And do you not believe that these business practices sacrifice jobs in areas where these jobs are needed for their economic prosperity?
Thank you for the question. Firstly, in terms of the valuation, sadly, it hasn't increased by hundreds and hundreds of percentage points. But this is a serious, sad, and emotional subject in terms of the impact upon our employees. As a result of the macroeconomic environment, regulatory changes, including increases in competition, what we're experiencing at the price level with successive decreases with price commoditization and margin compression, and the significantly escalating costs within our supply chain, we have indeed, as you rightly point out, made difficult decisions in terms of reducing our staff levels.
Donc, Monsieur Entwistle, si je comprends.
So, Mr. Entwistle, if I understand you correctly, it's because of the regulatory framework and the increase in competition that you've decided to dismiss unionized employees in Quebec and to outsource these abroad.
So to be extremely precise in the response, yes, the regulatory environment, increased competition, as I said earlier, the decreasing prices and the macroeconomic environment that has seen significant cost escalation within our supply chain that we've talked to at length. And the impact of that has forced us to reduce staffing levels. This has been exacerbated by the digitization of our economy, which has put further pressure on jobs. But what I would highlight to you, sir, is that we have not undertaken any layoffs, zero. These departures have been, for our unionized employees, entirely voluntary departure plans. They've been extremely generous at a financial level to support the transition of employees to a new role, or they've been very generous early retirement plans. And when I say that they're voluntary departure plans, I mean exactly that. If the employees do not want to go and take the package, they can keep their job. And so it was entirely an elective undertaking, but nevertheless, extremely difficult just the same. And I think a reflection of the pressures that our businesses are being buffeted by.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Garon. Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Garon. Mr. Massé, you have the floor.
I want to return to and hear it from TELUS and Bell, Mr. Bibick and Mr. Entwistle, with regards to U.S. charges. Are you as well at $12 per day and $25 per month, or what is your pricing for turning on your phone in the United States? And do you have something that also stops if you actually try to turn your phone on and put it in airplane mode, then you get charged anyways, which Rogers does and takes the money? Is that your policy too?
Mirko, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
Sure, go ahead, Mr. Entwistle.
I'll go next.
Oh.
So our prices range between $5 and $10. We have online capability to set the package in place so that we can allow customers to make adjustments on the fly or to determine the best rate prior to their departure. Our service on the roaming front also includes healthcare extensibility for when people are traveling within that value proposition.
Thank you, Mr. Bibick.
Thank you. We always seek to be competitive in the marketplace. Our pricing would be in the same general zone as Mr. Entwistle indicated. We also, this is one area where I think the industry had needed to get much better in terms of communicating with customers, and more and more customers are getting accustomed to the options that they have. They can subscribe to packages that reduce their costs before they travel. They can, of course, have options locally where they can, and many customers are taking advantage of local SIM cards.
I just need to know the basic data. What is your cost?
But
what is your cost?
It's in the same.
Yeah.
But the important point here is customers.
The important point is what I'm asking specifically. What your cost is for this is how much per day if I turn on a Bell device do you charge in the United States?
The point is we have competitive pricing along the lines of what Mr. Entwistle said. We've gotten better communicating with the customers, the impacts.
Okay, so if I could, Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, I have limited time. He doesn't know what the answer. So I'm going to try to end this in a positive way.
This is about affordability.
No, I've asked you. Mr. Bibick, I've asked you a specific question. You can't even answer what your pricing is from your phones for these types of situations. I just asked per day what it costs, and you just reflect something to Mr. Entwistle. Maybe Mr. Entwistle can answer for you on behalf of Bell. I don't know. We have
the same general pricing. I'm happy to get back to you with specifics, but the point is we try to serve every customer appropriately, and if there is an issue, the customer can call us in and we'll take care of the customer. We don't want to lose the customer. We want to treat.
Okay, but that's not the question I asked. I'm going to try to leave this with Mr. Chair on a positive note. I'm hoping maybe the industry can actually take away from this the fact that we have many border communities and others that actually have to turn their phone on for emergency services, and perhaps there's a better way not to actually put the customers in such a vulnerable position at the end of the day. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Massé. Mr. Viss, the floor is yours.
Thank you to all of our witnesses here today. I have a lot of great questions, but there is something else I'd like to discuss, and that is the motion I tabled to all committees and received on Friday. I cannot ignore the fact that this government is planning to hike the carbon tax another 23% come April 1st. I cannot ignore the fact that the Liberals still owe businesses more than $2.5 billion in carbon pricing revenues from the first 5 years of the program and refuse to say when the money will flow. I cannot ignore the fact that this government is cutting the financial relief it promised to small businesses in a time of high inflation, interest rates, and labor shortages. I cannot ignore the fact that according to the Superintendent of Bankruptcy, in January 2024, businesses saw a year-over-year increase in business insolvencies of 48.8%. Specifically, mining and oil and gas extraction saw a 92.9% increase in insolvencies, and professional, scientific, and technical services saw an increase of 70.6%. I cannot ignore the fact that according to Statistics Canada, November 2023 was the 5th straight month in which fewer businesses opened than closed in Canada. I cannot ignore the fact that in 2023, Mexico overtook Canada as the United States' largest trading partner. Let that sink in. I cannot ignore the fact that the Minister of Small Business stated in Sudbury last week that she would bring the concerns of small businesses about the carbon tax back here in Ottawa. And I cannot ignore the fact that the minister stated her government was lowering taxes for small businesses at the Status of Women Committee, when in fact we are seeing the exact opposite happening on April 1st. Therefore, I move that, given the federal government has been collecting carbon tax revenue from small and medium-sized businesses since 2019, that despite repeated promises to return more than $2.5 billion in promised carbon tax revenues to small businesses, the government has failed to do so, that many small and medium-sized businesses in various sectors of the Canadian economy are going insolvent, and despite the fact that 7 provincial premiers, including Liberal Premier Fury, and more than 70% of Canadians oppose another 23% carbon tax increase on April 1st. The committee called for 6 meetings to be held immediately and invite the following witnesses: the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Small Business, the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, and various small and medium-sized businesses and industry representatives, and that the committee hear from witnesses the extent of the damage caused by the carbon tax on the economy, and from government officials a timeline to return money owed to small businesses and to freeze the carbon tax at its current levels and to report back to the House. I move this motion today, Mr. Chair, because I have spent a lot of time over the last number of weeks. This is the number one thing that small businesses are talking to me about. All of us around this table are hearing the same thing from small businesses. They can't take another tax increase. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Viss. Now, the committee cannot ignore the fact that you've moved your motion and therefore needs to debate it and decide what to do with it. And considering we've only got 5 minutes left, I'll leave the witnesses go because we're going to enter the debate on the terms of the motion as moved by Mr. Viss. So thank you very much for your appearance today at committee and thanks for your testimonies. So colleagues, there's a motion on the floor. I'm opening it up for comments, debates. Mr. Turnbull.
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that I've seen the motion in writing. It would be really helpful to have a copy of it. If the clerk has that, would like to read it. But obviously, ideologically, the Conservatives don't believe in climate change. They don't want to cut the rebates for Canadians, and that seems to be something they're pushing as a false narrative constantly, and denying the fact that 8 out of 10 families get more money back than they pay. But that, besides the point, I think we've all agreed to an agenda in our subcommittee meeting. The report was tabled in this committee as a whole. We all approved that unanimously. And we have a number of priorities that are set out in that agenda that do not include this particular study as the top priority. I think our agreement has been to follow through on that plan. We've seen the Conservatives time and time again try to insert additional studies into that agenda, and which is fine. I mean, it's their prerogative to do so. But it seems that there's so many competing priorities that they have that they can't pick which one they want to study first. My sense is that we have to finish our work on C-27, which is top priority. I think all of us recognize the importance of that bill. We know government legislation is generally supposed to take priority, although, of course, committees are masters of their own domain, but that has been our agreement. I think quite rightfully we owe it to Canadians to update the privacy legislation, which is 20 years old, and have a framework for regulating artificial intelligence. And I think that should be the top priority. If, when that is complete, Conservatives want to change some of the other priorities that they've set out and prioritize this particular motion, then perhaps we can have that debate at that time. But for now, I don't see how we can fit this in, and it doesn't make sense that this would somehow supervene over the other priorities that have already been agreed to and identified with a set committee schedule that I think is got to stay in place. We have witnesses lined up, committee meetings scheduled. We're all planning for those, and we have to get to clause by clause on C-27. So those are my perspectives, and I'm sure other committee members will share theirs.
Thank you. Monsieur Viss.
I want to move to a vote in just a minute, if that's okay, Mr. Chair. But I'll just point out, today I'm wearing the tartan tie of Abbotsford. My riding in Mission Matsqui Fraser Canyon, despite whatever the Liberals say, has been impacted more by climate change than any other riding in the history of Canada. And we still have not been made whole, despite repeated promises from this government, who said that a carbon tax increase will stop wildfires and floods. That is not the case. That is not scientifically valid, the narrative coming from the Liberal Party. We're pushing for this small business study because businesses are suffering big time across Canada, and we owe it to the job creators in this country to start looking clearly at what they're doing. And there's no better committee than the Industry Committee to do that. This is an emergency, and I would like to go to a vote. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Viss. I appreciate your sentiment. However, if there is a motion and any member wants to speak to it, we can't move to vote on the motion. It needs to be debated, and I recognize Mr. Massé.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd rather have this dealt with at our side committee with regards to business and organizing what meetings are. My binder is full of all kinds of motions of study. I mean, we could add another, I guess, 3 days of committee work if the House resources were available, and we still wouldn't get through them all. So appreciate the tabling of the motion, but at the same time won't support it because we're going to basically do it. Today we're missing out even at the final hours of the CEOs of, basically the most important issue for Canadians that are facing right now. So for me, I won't be supporting the motion, and I think we should maybe look at going to this to committee business so we can organize our schedule appropriately. Thank you.
Okay, I see that there are no more comments, so we'll put the motion to a vote. Madame la Greffière.
Mr. Turnbull.
Against.
Mr. Gahir.
Against.
Madame Lapointe.
No.
Madame Koutrakis.
No.
Mr. Van Bynen.
No.
Monsieur Généreux.
Oui.
Mr. Perkins.
Yes.
Mr. Viss.
Yes.
Mr. Williams.
Yes.
Monsieur Garon.
No.
Mr. Massé.
No.
La motion est défaite. Merci.
The motion is defeated. Thank you to all. And this wraps up our 2 hours for this committee meeting. We will see you on Wednesday. Have a good day.